This is the Blackout Podcast.
Hi, Dylan.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for coming in today.
No problem, man.
I know I had to, we're supposed to do this later.
I know.
Let's do it now.
Yeah.
And thanks for being super flexible for
problem,
that. And the pens.
Yeah.
I remember we met at the Halifax social network,
You got
and
it.
you were like, I make pens. I'm thinking, what is this person
Yeah,
talking about?
it's common reaction. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, your straw hat.
Yeah,
I'm
I know.
Who
Like,
is
who's this guy? Yeah.
And then you told me the story,
Yeah.
and I was floored. So,
Thank
do you want to tell us a bit about your background,
Sure.
about how you got into the pens?
Okay. Well, my company's name is called Elwood Pens. It's named after my grandfather. So he was a master machinist in Pictou County, where I'm from. I kind of worked mostly from the 40s through until pretty well the 90s.
Wow.
He started working when he was like 14 and kind of was a self-taught tradesperson for the majority of his life. But kind of his story was he didn't really know his actual father growing up. He was originally born in the Magdalene Islands, just off coast of Quebec.
Okay.
And then he moved to Nova Scotia when he was like 4 or 5. Didn't know any English and just kind of had to learn and go to school and that kind of thing. But as he kind of matured and grew up, he developed alcohol kind of dependency and became an alcoholic at one point in his life, and kind of that's became a huge piece of his personality. And as time went on, he kind of dropped that habit and was in AA for well over 25 years and was sober for over 25 years. And the guy that I knew growing up as a kid, that whole part of the story where I mentioned where he was like an alcoholic, never was really brought up. And he passed away when I was probably 14, and I'm 22 now. And kind of after he passed, I learned a bit more about his story, and he was involved in working on a project called the Avro Arrow.
What is that?
It was a jet plane in the 1950s that was the first jet plane in the world to go to Mach 2.
Yeah, I think I've actually. Okay, so
There's like a movie about it. And all that
So,
stuff.
I'm not a kid, but like a few years ago, I loved history before they started doing Vikings. Is great. It's just history was where you watch Hitler stuff. That was what history was, right?
Yeah.
And I think I heard about that plane. It was this amazing stuff.
Unbelievable,
But then they stopped making it, right?
100%.
Oh yeah,
What's
what's
I
going
know,
on?
I
Why
know.
would they do that? I can't really remember the story, but do you?
Yeah, I do a little
Yep.
bit. So I've actually never watched the movie, to be honest with you, which is probably something I should do since I talk about it so much. But the gist of the story was that it was a project in the 50s that the Canadian government was trying to get into aerospace to kind of be a competitor with the United States and Russia. And the United States, as the story goes, was putting pressure on Canada to stop working on it.
Oh, that's what happened.
And unofficially.
Yeah,
but
obviously.
like nobody really knows. But they stopped working on it when the government switched. So it went from, I believe it was from a liberal to a conservative or vice versa. And then they cut the funding almost initially after the switch. And then all the people that were working on the Avro Arrow, so they all went down to the United States and were involved with the moonshot project in the 60s. So all these incredible engineers from Canada go down to work on Apollo.
I remember this story. I'm like, what? It doesn't make... Well, I mean, obviously it makes sense now, but, back then I'm thinking, you guys build this stuff.
I know,
It was like like an alien ship they were building.
Yeah.
And this is back when people were still flying with wooden planes, and they made this thing.
Yeah.
I remember this story. That's so cool. I didn't know that. Yeah.
And what's really interesting is the Avro Arrow was the basis for what was called the SR-71 Blackbird.
Blackbird, yeah.
Yeah, which is an incredible plane as well. But my grandfather...
they still can't officially talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the stuff is not like officially documented, but there is one at the bottom of a lake in Ontario that they're fishing out. So one that's completely full, so it might not even work anymore.
Do you think US will take it?
I don't know, man. I think we own the whole thing. Like, it was our project and everything. It was more so like they were just like, look, man, like, we don't want to compete with you guys because this is already so competitive. So just stop doing that and buy our stuff. And the government was just like, I guess so. But
that is bullying 101.
100%, yeah, 100%, man. And what was interesting with my grandfather was he essentially, I've heard a couple different versions of this part of this story, but from what I've been most recently told, it was he was off of work from a place in New Glasgow, Maritime Steel, where he was a manufacturing person and trained as a machinist and did the stuff like that there. But he went down to Ferry Aviation in Sherbrooke here in Halifax and worked on the engine that was called the Iroquois engine. And it was essentially... like everything about the Avro Aero was incredibly innovative. So even the engine that went to Mach 2 in their testing, the Iroquois engine was supposedly be able to go to Mach 3 or up to Mach 5. And and it was never even like used because by the time it got to where they could actually implement it and give it a shot, the funding was cut. So my grandfather could, and I was like, man, that would have been so cool.
Wherever you go, they cut the funding.
I know. I was like, so that's kind of his story, and I kind of learned about that. And in high school, I learned how to make these wooden pens in a woodshop class, and over the summer of 2014, before I started at the NSCC to take business, I had the first pen that I made in my golf bag, and I was an avid golfer growing up. I still love to. I haven't even, now that I think about it, I haven't been golfing in like 2.5 years because of how much I've been working on these. But essentially, like a guy who I randomly booked in with, you can just walk onto the golf course and say, is there an open spot? I'd like to play with that group. And I just did that, and it was 2 guys from Pictou County and some banker from Toronto. And the banker from Toronto had a golf cart, but he wanted to drink the whole day. So he says, hey kid, I was like 17. He was like, hey man, I want to drink. Do you want to drive my golf cart around so that I don't like crash into a tree? And I'm like, and at the time I was going to walk, and it was like 30 degrees. So I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So I get in, and we don't have anything to mark score with. And I take this pen out of my bag and I start marking the score. And on the first hole, he offers me like $50 for it. And I was like,
for driving him around?
No, just for the pen.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was like, no, man, like it's not for sale. And by the 18th hole, he offered me, I think it was like $200. Yeah, and I still didn't sell it to him. I still have it in New Glasgow, but it kind of made me realize like there's probably at least 3 to 5 people, even in Pictou County, that might be interested in something like this. So I started working on it in September 2014. Officially became a business in June of 2016, and about 2 years after that, so June 2018, I moved to a space on Argyle Street here in Halifax.
Yeah, I saw it. It says you're actually one of the downtown business members.
Yeah.
What led to that move?
Well, pretty much I just couldn't find a place to work from, like, to be honest with you. Like, I was working out of a shed in New Glasgow for pretty well 2 years that had no heat and no lights. So I would have to run a 60-foot extension cord from the front of my mom's house to my backyard. Yeah, that's how I started. I originally that's when I was running my business. I was running it from there. But when I first started making them, I made them in my Uncle Joe's garage, way out in the woods, and it's kind of where I learned how to make them. But kind of was just traveling back and forth from St. Mary's on Maritime bus every single weekend to try and get to the space, and I was spending so much money on the bus. I was like, this is ridiculous. So tried to find a space, and in January through February 2018, I was like, there's no way I'm taking Maritime bus this weekend. Like, it's like the weather's too bad and all that stuff. So I started looking for a space, and I happened to find one that April, and I moved in there first week of June. I'm actually switching to a different space this weekend.
Oh, okay.
Actually, today I'm kind of setting up a smaller space. It's just like financially, it's just too much. You're pretty much looking at like for 1,000 square feet in downtown Halifax, I would say is between $1,500 to $2,500 a month. which is insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found a space that can meet all my needs other than a retail space.
So you create the pens in this space?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So basically what I've been doing for the last few months from June through December, I was making pens in this space, and pretty much just I'd make them in what used to be a barber shop, turn that into a woodworking studio, and then there used to be a massage studio, and I turned that into an office retail area. And I had 4 or 5 people working for me this summer as well, and kind of really got things going. And then in September through December, like the last weekend of September, I just got super, super sick, like out of nowhere.
What was wrong?
I think I had mono. I haven't.
What was that?
Mono's like I don't know the correct term, but it's like a virus.
Oh, okay.
And essentially, you just can't you get really weak and just extreme fatigue.
Oh man.
Yeah. So I haven't gotten the blood work back yet. So I'm waiting to see if it actually was that or if it was something else. But it could have even just been burnout, because I've been working 80 to 100 hours a week for like 5 years. So there's no way that's not a factor.
Yeah.
But just trying to. I just got back on my feet probably second last week of December, like probably a week before Christmas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was pretty much out of commission from the start of October until then. So kind of got back into my new, like this space on Argyle, started January, kind of had to move stuff out first of this week and moving into this smaller space that I happen to find.
This space is still downtown?
It's not downtown. It's kind of like somebody's garage, actually. I saw an ad on Kijiji. It was like, hey man, I make pens. Can I make pens in your garage? And he's like, oh, man, I guess so. So I just started moving stuff in yesterday. So I'm going to be making pens again today. So
okay.
Yeah. I probably between October through December, I think I made 3 or 4 in total, and I usually make like 25 a week.
That's what I was going to ask you about. You answered already.
So kind of just getting back into it now, but I'm going to be trying to transition the brand from just being about pens to being about other stuff as well, whether it's other woodworking products or other products as a whole, but kind of just building a brand that focuses around kind of what is the mantra of it now. And that's the phrase, write your own story.
That's what caught me. I remember I was like, that was it. That was what caught me.
Yeah. And kind of the idea there is to just provide people an opportunity to feel like they can be authentic in who they are and be themselves, but as well kind of provide different examples of people that have been doing different things in their lives. So I'm actually going to be starting a podcast myself within the next month or so.
Yeah, you should invite me.
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%. You could definitely come on. So kind of the idea there is to take different people from different industries, whether it's business or art or even like a police officer. I literally don't care. As long as the person is open to telling who they are and what they're about. And just providing this huge catalog of individuals, whether they're from Nova Scotia or they're from, I don't know, Zimbabwe or Australia or somewhere like that. Just providing people an opportunity to see how many different types of people and how many different ways to live life there is. And it's kind of something that, and it's something that I'm passionate about, one, because I always have to deal with the fact, hey, I make pens. That's not a fun conversation to have 100. I've had that same conversation 10,000 times, and it's like, oh, okay, you make pens, and then if you don't see them, you're just thinking this guy's insane.
Yeah, you're no beak or paper maker or somebody.
Exactly. Like what are you doing? These have been around for 200 years. Why are you trying to innovate that? And it's less about the pen itself, but rather what it represents. So some people buy my product because it has wood from Nova Scotia. And say they have a family member that lives in Edmonton, they'll send them this piece of Nova Scotia that they can use in their day-to-day lives and remind them of home. And in some cases, people just want a fancy pen that looks nice, but I'd say 70% of my sales are gifts, things like that. So yeah. That's kind of the gist of me and what I'm about, so.
Yeah, well, and then how did I write the story? How do you
write your own story?
Yeah.
I didn't come up with it. I'm never going to take claim for that. It was a friend of mine, I believe her name's Ashima. I met her
I was going to ask, where is she from?
She's from India originally. But I met her at an event through St. Mary's in February last year, and we were taking a shuttle over to Casino, Nova Scotia, and I was just saying like, yeah, I'm trying to come up with like a new tagline for my pen business, and like we'd already talked about my pen business for like 4 hours because it's the only thing I talk about. And she said, well, why don't you use like write your own story? And I was like, I'm going to use that, and I might not ever credit you, but if I ever do, like, just so you know, it's like I'm going to use it. And that's kind of something I've been trying to figure out a way to bring in to the business since then.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, first off, you're literally writing your own story, but
yeah.
The thing about pens, and I suck at this because my writing sucks. The thing about pens is when you actually write, there's an emotion attached to it.
Agreed.
And that's why when you write something, you can't really forget it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because you feel the emotion. Yeah. It's something that I didn't really understand. Like, if you had told me 7 or 8 years ago that I would be making pens and trying to do it as a living, I would have told you, like, what are you talking about, man? Like, that makes no sense. I originally wanted to be a geography history professor.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
so
the whole thing. Way
yeah.
out of...
I know.
What brought that in? Why did you want to be that?
Well, in the 9th grade, my mom, she used to work as a educational assistant, and she would work with kids that have special needs or some kind of learning disability, or maybe they just needed somebody to help explain their schoolwork, like whatever. And she's done that since I was probably in the 1st grade. But in 9th grade, I had to do like take your kid to work day. And I went into my old elementary school, and I went into a grade 5 class, and I taught them long division in like 45 minutes. And then I was like, I'm pretty good at this. Like, I like this. This is fun. So my whole like high school career was just about preparing to go be a teacher. And then I had a scholarship to go to university in New Brunswick, and I was in something called the IB program, or International Baccalaureate, which some people call the quote-unquote smart kid program for Nova Scotia. I call it college prep that is more difficult than college. That's how I would word it. Like, I don't find university or college, even in comparison, as challenging.
How long was the program for?
It's essentially 3 years. There's like pre-IB, which is grade 10 in Nova Scotia, and then grade 11, grade 12 is IB. And you finish up all your exams in May of grade 12 for the most part. So it's a little different, and it's an internationally recognized program. So say you wanted to get into, I don't know, Harvard or a place like that in Europe, you could be like, this is my IB score, and it's in total out of 45. And if you have a 44, you can get into Oxford. Like, that's the level. And my scores weren't that high, but I did quite well in geography, and because that was a topic I always loved, because it's essentially the study of people and how they relate to their surroundings. And that's how I look at it. And that's a topic that I'm still very passionate about, but I do it more on a sales basis these days.
In what way?
If you try to sell somebody a pen, it's extremely difficult. So you have to be able to ask the right questions to make them understand the value of your product, first off. But if I just walk up to somebody and I'm like, hey, check this out, they'll be like, oh, okay, that's a cool looking pen, but they're probably not going to buy it. So you have to understand what motivates them to purchase, and you have to figure that out within less than 15 seconds most of the time. So say I go into a networking event, whether it's like something like Halifax Social Network, but maybe more businessy, maybe it's a Chamber of Commerce event. Pretty much every single person there is a potential customer for me. Yeah. Whether or not they're giving a gift to somebody, or they're, let's say, their corporation gives out gifts, and they know like so-and-so has been looking for something like this that we can personalize, and it's not a coffee mug or a really cheap pen that was made in an assembly line. Something more personal. That's something that I provide. So I try to make it so I can steer a conversation in a sales sense towards that. And it's not even something I consciously do. It's just that I'm naturally wired to be a salesperson.
Naturally wired.
I mean? Yeah. I never realized that I was. And I got a job at Mark's Work Warehouse when I was 18, right when I was at the NSCC, and I had never sold anything before. And I remember like the day, like after, like I think it's like the 27th of December or something like that, the store brought in like 90,000 in revenue or sales, and I think I sold like $45,000 in work boots.
Whoa!
It was insane. I didn't get commission, which sucked. But it was really cool. Like, and what I realized at that time was that it was all just about trying to build relationships with people that would walk in, and all these different tradespeople would walk in, and they would be talking to all the other different salespeople, but they wouldn't actually use the products that were in the store. And say there's a guy comes in and he's a welder, and he was looking for a pair of boots that have some kind of covering on the top of it that will make it so whenever he's welding, it won't burn through his shoelaces. There's only one pair of boots at that time when I was working there that would do that. And if he didn't see them, he wouldn't buy them. So you have to be able to walk up to the person and have a conversation. So I just learned how to do that. And from learning how to do that, I realized that I was good at it. And over time, I decided I wanted to sell pens, and now here we are. So, yeah, man.
And I remember there's what. Anyway, should I just share the story of why you decided to name it after your grandfather?
I would say the biggest reason was I couldn't come up with a name. And I wanted a way to make it feel more personal. And I was trying to come up with a name. Originally, the first name that my working name for it was Pictou County Pens. But the acronym for that's PCP. So I said, yeah. So I was like, I better not do that one. That's not a good idea.
Oh God, it's funny you actually brought that up, because acronyms actually kill names.
100%.
You have a great name and then it's like, and you take out the first two letters and it means something. Where one of my jobs, we just renamed the team to support services, right?
Okay.
And what we always do, because we are developing this database. What we do when we are naming a team in the database, we just take the first two names, right?
Yeah.
So say language services will be LS.
Yeah.
Computer services will be CS.
Of course.
Support services will be SS, right? So we're in this meeting, right? We are naming things, and nobody picks up on this, right? Because we are calling it support services.
Yeah.
And I'm like the little guy in the room. I'm thinking, I can't let it. I'm like,
better not let that one slide,
we are going to call it support services. They're like, yeah, that's the name. We're going to put it in the database. Yeah. Are we going to call it support services all true? And they're like, no, we have to put,
acronym.
I'm like, that's SS. And you could hear the silence in that room. It's like, I guess we'll call it support services.
That's so funny.
So PCP. Oh my God.
Yeah, right? So you get it. Oh my God. And I didn't realize it. Like, I did a whole business plan and project for a class, and I went up and presented. And I never realized. And a guy at the back of the room was like, "Hey, man, you know that it's like stands for PCP." I'm like, "Oh my God." Yeah, I felt so dumb. But then I tried to come up with another name, and I finished up my first year at the NSCC in Stellarton, and then I went to the NSCC in Truro for international business. And during my first day there, I met this guy who was a digital animation artist, and he's super, super talented. Pretty much, he loves to joke around and just give people a hard time. And he was like, "Yeah, you should call your pens Goodwood." And because of how I am, I was like, you know what? That's going to be the name. That's going to be so I literally used that as my working name, and like it was like my friend gave me this name as my working name, and this is so and so's name, and I did that for like a year. And,
in South Africa, there is actually an area called Goodwood, right?
Oh, really?
But it's spelled as one word.
Okay.
So you never notice it until you say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to Goodwood," or you split it.
That's so funny. But and like in what I do, there's so many jokes like that. Like I literally make wooden pens.
Yeah, it's phallic.
Exactly.
Shape, so.
I know, like it's the worst, and at the time, like when I first was getting into it, like I was never considering that. I was like, oh, it's just a pen, and it happens to be made of wood. And then like 4.5 years later, I'm like, yeah, I've heard all of your jokes. Yeah. I know all the lines. Yeah, it's always funny. And I lived in Europe briefly in 2017 for like an internship with the NSCC, and I was planning on running summer school programs, and it was in the Netherlands, and everybody there speaks English, but they're Dutch, and they would be speaking Dutch most of the time unless they were speaking to me. So sometimes I'd be in a room and there'd be like 7 people and then me, and they'd be all speaking Dutch. And then if they wanted to talk to me, they'd speak to me in English. So one guy, I was like just signing something. It's like a boardroom. And he's like, so you made that? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, why? Straight up, and I loved that question because nobody just asks that. Nobody, like nobody's like, nobody just says why. They usually go, oh, that's interesting. What got you into it? Like, but Dutch people and German people just go right at it, and I loved it because it's so different from Canadian culture. And we got into this long conversation, and then he said he would never get into it because he would be afraid people would make all these jokes. And we had I think it was a 30-minute conversation just about penis jokes, because he found them hilarious. And I was like, dude, like I mean, like you're making fun of what I do, but like I guess we could have this conversation. Yeah, he was a character. He was like 6'9". Yeah, he was a big guy. Most of the average height of a man in the Netherlands is like 6'2".
Yeah, I heard this.
Yeah, so I was really short.
I heard this. I have so one of my cousins is married to. He's Canadian, but his parents are from the Netherlands.
Okay.
Like they're super tall. Then they have this kid. Oh my god, the kid. I don't know, maybe 16.
Yeah.
He's a giant.
Yeah,
this
man.
kid, like that. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What is the process of making one pen?
Okay. I would say it depends on the model. Sometimes like the big ones down at the bottom there, that's called the Canadiana.
Okay.
Depending on what the wood is, that one can... I know. Yeah.
I'm gonna try that.
I know. Depending on what it's made of,
Yeah.
it can be like between 30 minutes up to 2 hours.
Okay.
So say I'm working with like the black wood in the top there. That's actually called...
This one?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
That one's actually called blackwood.
Okay.
And it's from Africa, and it's what they used to use to make clarinets and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
And they used to use them for bagpipes as well at one time. So that wood is so dense and so brittle that you have to be incredibly careful while you're doing it, or it can just explode. So, yeah.
What tools do you use?
So I use a drill press, a bandsaw, and a wood lathe. Those are kind of my big 3. And I use like sandpaper and chisels, and I'll kind of walk you through the whole process.
Great.
So say I'm making these slim pens at the top. That's what I started making. So usually what I do is I'll get like a piece of wood that's between like 4 to 5 inches long. Take that and mark on it where 2 brass tubes will go. So like you see the 2 pieces of wood there.
Yeah.
Essentially there's a tube inside of it that actually holds its shape.
Oh, okay.
And that's how you make it so you can have the internal pieces, so like the actual pen mechanisms and stuff like that. Because if it was touching the wood and the wood would say there's ink and the ink breaks and it goes into the wood, it could make the wood break, stuff like that. So I don't design or make any of the metal pieces, but all of my designs in the wood are slightly different depending on what I'm doing. So what I do is I mark it, then I cut it, and then I drill a hole for that tube to go into. Then I glue that tube in. Then I do something called squaring it, and that happens on my drill press as well, where it's a specific tool that essentially cuts a round hole in the top part of the wood so that the brass tube and the wood are perfectly square. And that's the only way to make it so that these can end up perfectly straight. Because if you do it in any other way, you can use like a belt sander and stuff like that for it, but I don't find it's as accurate. if you don't do that, it can end up imperfect at the end. And if it's imperfect, it'll shatter easier and everything like that. And everything that I sell has a lifetime warranty.
Yeah, that I remember you told me that. I was like, I don't know many people that give that these
commitment.
days.
Yeah. And the reason why they don't is because they don't want to deal with the customer coming back and trying to fix it and whatever. But I've only really ever had 2 customers come back with pens that stopped working. And for the most part, it was only one issue was of my like actual manufacturing being wrong. And it was just like the tube was like 0.5 millimeter too short, so the actual pen would get stuck out, and you couldn't unclick the pen. So I had to fix that, and that took me a long time to figure out how to fix. And I couldn't, so I just had to replace the pen. I think it took me 6 months, something like that.
Wow.
Because I didn't want to just make a new pen. I wanted to learn how to actually fix the problem and then fix, like, you know what I mean? Because then if it happened again, I could fix it in 30 minutes. Yep. So, yeah, but kind of the commitment to the lifetime warranty is no matter like what problem happens with the pen, chances are I'm going to be able to fix it or replace it. And if I can't fix it, I can replace it pretty easily. But the big thing is I always try to fix the pen because the person has a personal connection to it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I always try to do that first. But yeah, that's kind of a big thing for me as well. And I probably sold somewhere under 1,000, but at least 750 pens in the last 3 years or so. And only 1 or 2 have come back. So it's like the mechanisms I use are pretty high quality and everything like that. So usually not an issue, but it does happen from time to time. But I would say most businesses don't commit to it because they don't make their products.
Oh, they outsource.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
It's out in China, and it's gonna break. And
yeah, it's not made to last. It's made to be used. And
so, what does the warranty cover?
Literally, like if the pen stops working, I'll fix it or replace it.
But ink is up to the person now.
100%. Yeah. So I'll show you with this one. So every single one has like a replaceable cartridge, and generally speaking, for the first little while I was replacing them if they ran out the first time. But now what I do is I send a link to where I would order them from if I was the customer, and they can either purchase them from there or they can get them from me. So like this pen can completely come apart and you can replace the ink inside of it, and you can do that for all of those. I even make like pencils as well.
Yeah, I saw that one. I actually saw that one on Instagram.
Yeah.
The girl had it on her, like she was in class or something, and then she put it. I saw it in your story.
Yeah, man. That's my friend Ria, and she's great. But it's like just a regular mechanical pencil, like 0.7, and I've been using them for years for my own woodworking because the lines have to be so precise. And I always try to use every product that I make as well, so that I can kind of judge how long it will last. And I've only I've cycled through probably every pen that I use except for some of my fountain pens. I actually have never written with one of my own fountain pens.
Why not?
Because I don't know how to write with them.
What makes them difficult?
Like my writing is actually atrocious, to be honest with you. What makes them interesting is you have to kind of do like flowing motions, and I'm just not like and anytime I have made a fountain pen, it's either for a display set. So if I think, I don't want to ruin this and like break it, then I have to replace the parts and put a new one in. Or it's for a customer, and I don't want to ruin it again for the customer. And I've probably only made like 25 fountain pens, but I probably have, because I was sick for a few months, I probably have about 300 pens in total that are about half finished right now, and I'd say 50 of them are fountain pens.
And I remember you said you have 4 people working for you. What do they do?
I did, yeah. So right now it's just me.
Okay, but when they were with you, what were they doing?
So I had somebody who was doing graphic design and things like that, and there's like a logo for my business that's literally my face. And she made that. We did a touch up on my logo that's like the signature. We put a maple leaf on the end of that, and she kind of touched that up. It's actually a direct trace of my grandfather's signature, which was actually written with a fountain pen back in the 60s. So it's from the deed of the property that he bought back then, and I pretty much grew up on. It's still in the family. So she was working on stuff like that, and she helped me do some video stuff, and just a super, super talented person. I had another friend who did photography and web design. I have my website right down while I figure out, I have to, because I'm moving locations, I have to switch all the information. So I have to re-edit that. So that'll probably be up by the 15th again.
Okay.
I was hoping to have it up.
Just as you start the new place?
Yeah, exactly. But I have to wait a week or two. But he built that, and that's beautiful. And some of the, all the professional looking photos of the pens, he took those. I had another person who was doing my social media, my accounting, and she would do person photography. So she was great as well. And then I had my brother, and his job title was actually First Goon.
It's like,
Yeah. So if I needed help moving something, he was a guy. And if I he would help me. We actually probably wrote 5 or 6 ads that we haven't even had a chance to do yet.
Oh, okay.
So we shot one brief thing over the summer and put it up.
I think I saw that.
Yeah.
It was in the cafe or something.
Scanway on Grafton there. Yeah.
Okay.
So I kind of walked in one day. I was like, hey, I make pens in this place, like literally right behind you guys. Can we come in on a Sunday and shoot a 2-minute ad in here? And they're like, yeah. I was like, okay. So that was really fun. And kind of things like that we had planned, and the idea was to have them all kind of set up for the holiday season.
Yeah, and then
do it that way. Yeah, so just didn't work out, but this year will be interesting. For sure.
Taking care of your health is way more important.
100%, man.
Yeah.
100%. For me, it's not easy to take a step back and be like, okay, I can't. It got to the point in November where I would say the last week of October and all of November, I couldn't even stand for longer than an hour every day. And I'm the kind of person, when I'm making these, I'm on my feet for 5-6 hours at a time, and then I sit down and hash other stuff out. So not being able to do that meant I literally couldn't make anything. And working through that was incredibly difficult.
How was that for your mental health?
Oh, brutal. But I'm wired a little different from other people as well. I've never been diagnosed with any kind of mental health issues or anything like that, but I'm sure genetically I'm predisposed to. So if I went to get testing done, I'm sure they'd come up with something. And I'm not overly educated on the topic, but overall mental health is a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about and talking about, especially with everything related to my grandfather and people I have in my personal life that go through all kinds of different things. But I would say at one point in the last few months, I was so stressed that I couldn't physically, I guess, how should I word this? I was so stressed that I was on the verge of a panic attack 100% of the time.
Oh man, that's crazy.
It was really, really rough. And it was a full week of that. And it was because I didn't know what to do. And that's usually not a problem that I have. Because usually what I do is okay, this is the problem. These are all my things that I can lay out that I can do to resolve it. But when you're physically not able to do anything, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah.
So that was at that time period, and I worked through that, and I'm great now. So that I can't complain, but understanding how that feeling feels for other people now it certainly makes my perspective very different. And even in high school, I actually had a very, very close friend of mine about a month and a half before I graduated, he died of suicide, and that made a huge impact on my life. He was just an incredible individual, and out of nowhere he was gone, and nobody really knew what was going on, and just the fact that people that incredible can just be gone instantly. is in something that made me realize at the age of 17 that you have to be kind to everybody because you really never know. Mm-hmm. Because I'd probably spoken to him about a week and a half before this happened, and he seemed fine. And there was no way for me to really have known, unless the person was comfortable telling you. So even like with Bell Let's Talk and things like that just happened like this week, just the promotion of the conversation is so important. And for me, mental health is a topic that I feel I'll probably get more into as the years go on, especially when it relates to addiction, especially in Nova Scotia. Like, I probably know 6 or 7 people under the age of 22 that are already alcoholics that I grew up with. And the fact that there's no conversation about alcohol abuse in Nova Scotia, like, I don't drink at all. And it has one to do financially. I don't want to pay $50 for a bottle of liquid to make me feel happy. To me, that's how I look at alcohol. But there are some people that's their only way out from the environment that they're in. So I'm very sensitive to that. But at the same time, learning the coping skills and learning how to take a step back from the pain that you're feeling and understand that you can talk to somebody, whether it's somebody you know personally or somebody you can talk to on the phone, whether it's Kids Help Phone for some people that are just under the age of 18. There's so many ways to reach out. And a startling statistic that I recently saw recently, the leading cause of death for men in the UK is suicide.
Okay, that's shocking.
Yeah. And like, just unbelievable. And that statistic really like hit home for me because I have lost a friend to that. And raising the conversation is great, but what do we do to resolve that? And I think that's the real big point that a lot of people don't have an answer to because we really don't know. In the last 30 years, mental health has changed in how we view it so much. And I do the best that I can to learn as much as I can, but at the end of the day, I pretty much work 60 to 80 hours a week. So there's only 5 or 10 hours in there that I can really learn. And I'm also a student at St. Mary's, so I have my courses as well.
Oh, wait. You're
Yeah, man. I know.
So that one threw me off.
Yeah.
I thought you were done. So what are you doing in St. Mary's now?
I'm still studying commerce. Yeah.
Okay.
So I had to withdraw from classes last semester because of my health issues. I'm only taking like 3 courses this semester.
Gotcha.
So I'm still technically considered full-time.
Gotcha.
But kind of just transitioning to back to classes this semester. It's going pretty well.
How do you even name the pens? Like the
How do I name them?
Yeah.
Well, most of them come pre-named, so that's great. So from my suppliers that I buy pen parts from, they're like, you should call this one the Canadian. And I'm like, oh, that sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah. And like the slim one they call Slim Line, and they talk about the line, like the black line that's on that. So that's where those names come from. But I think for me, like, I'm trying to get into a place where I can make my own designs as well. Like, I can't draw because I never developed the skill, but a person I was working with this summer is incredibly talented at drawing and design. So the whole summer we were like, hey, let's try to do this, and that was kind of a project we were going to do. So we still might do that this year, but what I want to do is make it so, say you want a pencil. You can have a pencil. Say you want to switch that pencil into a pen. You can just swap out the parts and put it in a pen. So you can keep the outer casing, similar to like...
how you pull that thing.
You got it. So this pencil, that's the whole mechanism.
Okay.
And that's like the actual shell.
Yeah.
So if you can just switch all the parts, you can pretty much just have whatever you want. And all you have to do is make sure the tube size can fit all these different things. So that's a design I've been working on in my head for about 4 years. And I can't figure out how to draw it, so I'm trying to get somebody to help me do it. So.
Okay, so I'm going to end with this. I mean, you're doing all these things and you still have school.
Yeah.
How do you keep going? Because it must be difficult sometimes.
It is, yeah, man. Like, I would say probably the last 2 years have been incredibly... Like, when I first started, the first 3 months when I started, I was working at Sobeys head office in New Glasgow. and I was working on this. So I was working 40 hours Sobeys and then 60 hours on this. And so every single day from 7 a.m. until 11 p.m. was work. And I did that for 3 months. Then I went back to school, and then I went to Europe. And you're going to burn out if you do that. And I burnt out 2 to 3 times over the last few years. So there's really no way to handle it. Like, you either do or you don't. And you either have to keep doing it or decide that what you're working towards isn't worth it.
Oh, wow.
That's how I look at it, and I'm very black and white about it. And it's not an answer that is easy for a lot of people, because, like, that's not fun.
Yeah.
But, like, that's how I look at it. Like, you either can do it or you can't. And there's people that should not be an entrepreneur. One, because it's so stressful. You have to take on incredible financial risk. 95% of small businesses fail within the first 2 years. I would say, 90%. And it's incredibly challenging, but I love what I do. And my passion isn't about trying to make a bunch of money. And it's fueled by this passion to try and get people to be open and just be themselves. But at the end of the day, what I want to do is I want to try to build the largest business to ever come from Atlantic Canada, not for the pursuit of my own financial gain, but to make sure people who haven't been given an opportunity to succeed are given that opportunity. I want to be able to give people well-paying jobs that they can build in their communities and try to give back as much as they can. But there's this huge perception that corporations don't care about people that work for them. And in many cases, I would agree with that.
Oh, okay. Because I was waiting.
I'm not 100%. But what if there was at least one example that you could look to and think,
like, those guys.
Yeah. And it's not even about me. It's about, okay, at least this company is trying. At least they're trying to build a successful business that makes good stuff. It's pretty cool overall, but they're trying to make the people that work for them happy too. And I think that there's a few examples of that out there, but I want to try to at least provide another one.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on today.
No problem, man. Thank you.
This is the Blackout Podcast.
Thanks for listening.